Hello, and welcome to Reimagining Love. I'm Dr. Alexandra Solomon. I have been studying relationships for over 20 years as a couples therapist, a professor, an award-winning author, and as a wife, mother, daughter, sister, and friend. Now, I'm inviting you into this space each week as I dig into some of the toughest and most fascinating relational dilemmas of our time. If you want to discover how to create vibrant and loving relationships in your own life, you have come to the right place. This is Reimagining Love. Hi there. Thank you so much for being here with me today. So I'm back with our fourth and final summer mailbag episode, totally ready to dive into 3 listener questions today. We've been sprinkling these mailbag episodes in, and I've really been loving them. We've got these fantastic listener questions. They come in from folks all over the world, and they've been piling up in my inbox. So it's been wonderful for me to spend some time connecting with you. So reminder, if you want to submit your own listener question, the link is in the show notes of all of our episodes. You can remain anonymous when you do it. You can ask a question about your intimate relationship, friendships, family dynamics, whatever you are struggling with, whatever you are curious about in this season of your journey. So keep your questions coming. Today's mailbag is going to be all about infidelity and rebuilding trust. And as such, I am predicting it's going to meet you, some of you, in some tender places. So one thought I have is perhaps you're going to listen while you take me on a walk. We know that bodies in motion tend to have an easier time being and staying regulated. I want you taking some deep breaths as we go, maybe even with a hand on your heart. I might do the same as we go through. And I want you to take pauses if you need to. There is no prize for listening all the way through, and there's certainly no prize for listening all the way through in one session. This is a tough subject. So I spend quite a bit of time in my work talking about infidelity. I do that for a few reasons. First of all, infidelity is pretty darn common in our relationship landscape. We don't have perfect data on this because it's a pretty sensitive subject, but we've got some data from 2009 from the Kinsey Institute that found that 23% of men and 19% of women report infidelity at some point. And then some more recent data from 2022 from the General Social Survey that found pretty similar findings. About 20% of men, about 13% of women admit to infidelity. So it's there and it happens. And I also talk about it because it's scary and it's controversial and there are lots of strong opinions and strong judgments. And you know that I want us to be turning toward subjects that are scary and emotional and triggering and be thoughtful and be brave together. I also talk a lot about infidelity because there's a lot that we can learn about what we need in our intimate relationships by studying infidelity, the dynamics of infidelity. And when we look at something that feels difficult and scary, it helps us do what we need to do to prevent it from happening in our relationships. And then finally, I talk about it because when infidelity happens, the people who are involved need and deserve care and support as they work towards growth and healing, whether they work towards growth and healing together as a couple that is in recovery, or whether the infidelity ushers in the end of the relationship. So it's less about, what happens after and more about wanting people to be on a journey of healing and acknowledgement and understanding so that they can integrate a painful chapter into their overall life story. So today, with these 3 questions, we're going to have a chance to look at infidelity from a few different perspectives. So our first listener question is about shame upon discovering an extramarital affair. Our second question is about jealousy in the wake of some boundary breaching behavior and how that's shaping the relationship. And then our third question is actually from an affair partner who is struggling with honesty and clarity within a long-standing affair. with somebody who is married. So, as always, these episodes are not a substitute for therapy. And I hope that everyone who wrote in to me today has got some space, some therapeutic space to process the particulars of their situations. All right, let's dive in. First up is Tina from Arizona, she, her pronouns. Tina writes, "Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your podcasts. My husband of 30 years had a 3-year affair. I didn't know, and I'm ashamed of myself for not finding out sooner and for being so trusting. Rationally, I know I'm being very hard on myself. We are working through it, and he's doing the work for a renewed relationship, but I am struggling. I'm so disappointed in myself for not finding out sooner. I initially saw a text, then my husband came clean. I feel like I could have ended this much sooner had I been smarter, less trusting, or more intuitive. Very few people know about the affair. I don't even want our adult children to find out or other family members. Sharing this frightens me, but I've been compelled to at least reach out to you. Perhaps this can help others with this struggle. I've searched for more info on this specific issue, but haven't found much, and so I reach out to you. I thank you for your time. I appreciate your knowledge and insight that you share. It has helped me and my husband a great deal. Blessings to you." Thank you, Tina. Thank you for reaching out with this question and for trusting me and the Reimagining Love audience with my thoughts here. So, and I also, what I hear loud and clear is there's a kind of care that you have for yourself and your marriage, certainly, but a care for all of the betrayed partners that you imagine might listen and have some benefits. So I hear that even in the depth of your pain, you are thinking more broadly and having compassion for fellow travelers. I think that sometimes is the hardest part of infidelity is it's like I imagine all these couples and individuals, kind of siloed in their own homes and not sharing their stories. And there's so much to learn, from knowing that you are far, far, far from walking alone. So let's unpack this shameful part of you, this self-blaming, self-judgmental part of you, because I hear that that is a piece of your pain that is troubling you and that's kind of feeling stuck for you. Here's what we know for sure. Shame and trauma are inextricably bound. They are so often, holding hands together, two facets of the same experience. So let's start by defining trauma. Gabor Mate gives us my favorite definition of trauma, which is that trauma isn't what happened to you. It's what happens inside of you as a result of what happens to you. So trauma is the things that you can't do after a painful experience, the words that you can't say after a painful experience, the support that you don't receive in the wake of a painful experience. So it's how the painful experience lives inside of you and the kind of overwhelmed, stuck kind of feelings and impacts that live inside of you. And we need to be thinking about the experience of a betrayed partner as an experience of trauma, right? Finding out that your partner has cheated is an overwhelming experience, one that overwhelms our coping strategies, our coping tools. And the research backs it up. In fact, a study that was done with betrayed partners found that 70% of them actually met the full criteria for a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. So we can imagine that even more than that 70% meet some of the criteria. So those impacts that we see of the ruminative thoughts and the replaying and the numbing are incredibly common among betrayed partners. And the experience of shame. I will tell you that in 30 years of clinical practice, and you know me, I rarely use the word never, but I will say that in 30 years of clinical practice, I have never met a betrayed partner who did not experience shame about having been cheated on. Truly, it is part and parcel of the experience of being a betrayed partner. And I say that because you are in very good company. And part of what shame says is you are alone. This is all you and only you. So I want to really frame this by saying that you are actually far from alone. The experience of being cheated on and the experience of shame go absolutely hand in hand. And the experience of shame and trauma are deeply entwined. There was a study a few years ago, 2020 research that was published in the Journal of Traumatic Stress that found an incredibly high correlation between the symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder and the experience of shame. So all of that is to say that it's not surprising that you are writing in about the experience of carrying shame that for you is playing out with a lot of like, I wish I had seen this sooner. I wish I had been smarter. And that you are personalizing that and making it about you. So it's not surprising, but it feels, what I hear is that it feels paradoxical. It seems paradoxical. It's like there's a party that says, I didn't do anything wrong. Why am I feeling shame about a thing that was done to me? So I want to talk you through 4 reasons why your shame makes sense. Not saying that your shame is right, but saying that shame in this context is actually really, really so understandable. There's this expression sort of like the wisdom of trauma. Let's talk about the wisdom of your shame. Like, what is your shame saying to you? How might you need to understand your shame in order to kind of loosen its grip on you? So first of all, I think it's really helpful to frame your shame as a symptom, right? Your shame is a symptom of the impact of this traumatic experience of finding out that your husband of 30 years has been unfaithful. And if you can frame your shame as a symptom, your shame stops being a you thing and it simply becomes a marker of what you're dealing with. Just like having a headache is part of having the flu. Just like experiencing hot flashes is a part of going through menopause. It's like, oh, I am going through the process of being in the wake of finding out that my husband has been unfaithful. Part of that experience is the experience of shame. It comes with the territory. So when you can look at it that way, the way that you can then relate to your shame is sort of like, okay, here you are, your shame. You are one part of my journey, one part of my experience. Like I'm imagining, this table and your shame is here and your sadness is sitting next to it. Maybe your anger is sitting next to it. Maybe your hope is sitting next to it. Maybe your vulnerability is sitting next to it. Maybe your faith is, it's like all these different parts. They're all at the table. And so I want you to relate to your shame as neither good nor bad, right nor wrong, but a part of this really painful, really complicated journey. Reason number 2 of kind of how and why your shame makes sense in this situation has something to do with secrecy. You write about how very few people know about what you and your husband are in the wake of. And there are probably very good and very rational reasons for why you and your husband have been quiet about the affair. I imagine that you are being, judicious and careful for lots of good reasons. But to the traumatized part of you, I imagine that part of you is at risk of getting a little bit confused. That to the traumatized part of you, the silence ends up feeling like proof that somehow you should be feeling shame. You know what I mean? It's like you and your husband are making a choice to be private about this, to be discerning about this. But to the part of you that is in pain, that feels like evidence that something is shameful about you, who you are, what it means that you are considering staying as he works through his part and the two of you work through your part. So toward that end, I want you to come back again and again to reminding yourself that there's a difference between privacy and secrecy. The two of you are being private here about this. And perhaps to try on for size the idea that you are making a choice not to tell others versus we can't tell others, to kind of remind yourself that there's a choice being made here. And I think wherever you can, for you to be looking at the places where you are making a choice is really, really important because the experience of being a betrayed partner is the experience of having choice taken away from you. So I want you to be on the lookout for ways in which you are in the driver's seat of your recovery journey. And I suspect that you are, even though it's painful, even though parts of you may want to be shouting this from the rooftops, it sounds like you are making a tempered choice to be private. So just the reminder there is to the traumatized part of you, remind that traumatized part that we are being quiet about this as a choice, not a necessity. The third thing I want to highlight is I don't know how far along you are in the journey of recovery, how long ago this discovery happened. But one of the things that happens in the wake of an affair is that you as a betrayed partner are dealing with really massive cognitive dissonance. You are trying to reconcile these two tracks. Track one is the life that you thought you were living during the 3 years that your husband was having an affair. And the other track is the life you were actually living during those 3 years of his affair. So it's like you have these two tracks, what you thought was going on, what you now know was going on. And so you're trying to kind of knit together those two worlds. And that cognitive labor of like piecing together what was, what actually was, what I thought was, what actually was, that process evokes shame or primes you for shame because you're putting things together. There's recognition. And in the wake of that recognition, the emotion that can come up is shame. So when shame comes up for you around that process of like what I thought was happening, what was actually happening, I've got my hand on my heart right now. Like just, I want you breathing into your heart, like bringing grace to yourself, that reconciliation, reconciling that cognitive dissonance of what you thought was and what actually was, that is a process that is that's you caring for yourself, you helping yourself feel solid ground beneath you. And so that work is actually work that is pride worthy, not shame worthy. Okay, the fourth facet I want to talk about is the way in which shame actually feels preferable to helplessness. So, Tina, for you to believe that you should have known sooner helps you preserve a sense that something could have been done to prevent this. It's like protecting and preserving an idea that something could have been done. If something could have been done, then actually you aren't helpless. You were just foolish, in quotes. And here's why that actually makes sense. Like I get why shame is preferable to helplessness. Because right now, Tina, you are exploring the possibility and the process of rebuilding trust with your husband. That is so vulnerable. So it makes sense that there's a part of you that is invested in blaming yourself because it helps you moderate the risk you're taking. You are trusting him. That's scary, right? You're trusting somebody who has the power to hurt you, who has hurt you. And so if you can keep some of the eggs in your basket, like I was to blame here, then perhaps in a way that feels safer than putting all the eggs in his basket, trusting him, right? There's this paradoxical way that blaming yourself keeps some eggs in your basket rather than putting all the eggs in his basket. So what the heck do you do about that? Well, I want you to be reminding yourself that A, you're not a fool for considering the possibility of trusting him again. B, I want you to remember that the ultimate trusting relationship you have is with yourself and that you are trustworthy. And C, I want you to know and remind yourself that trust rebuilds slowly. You can take one little egg and put it in his basket at a time. You don't have to go, trust rebuilding is an iterative process. Trust is broken in an instant, as you know, Tina, better than just about anybody, but it rebuilds slowly and it rebuilds over time and it rebuilds with experience. So that shame, I think, is there also to help you carry that scary feeling of how hard it is to trust again. And it gives you a sense of control. If I could have kept it from happening, then that means I had a hand in it. And that means I'm a little bit less at risk as I consider rebuilding with him. This is why it's vital that in the trust rebuilding process, your husband understands how to be an ally and an advocate in your healing, that he has a significant part to play in terms of showing you again and again and again that he is present with you and that he is taking appropriate accountability and that he is on his journey to help him understand for himself what integrity looks like, what led him to be out of his integrity. And that idea of carrying the shame as a couple, carrying the work as a couple is something I spend a lot of time on in my trust rebuilding e-course, which is called Can I Trust You Again? And we got links to that in the show notes, but there's a lot of coaching there that I do for the betraying partner to be near the betrayed partner in this process because that shame is inevitable and the relationship, needs to kind of carry the shame together. Couple of more thoughts for you here, Tina. Whenever we're talking about an emotion, here the emotion we're exploring is shame. A really important question to ask is, what is the function of this shame? What is the function that this shame is serving? Emotion is always serving some kind of a function. And so I want to extend that now to the relationship dynamic. I'm wondering, what is the function of your shame in the context of the relationship dynamic? And what I know to be true is sometimes a betrayed partner's shame is serving the function of protecting the betraying partner from their shame. So I'm wondering what your husband's relationship is with shame. We know from research that women are actually much more prone to experience shame than men. That means that all of us are culturally less experienced in seeing men grappling with shame. And I don't know what happens for you. I wonder if there might be ways that you have been socialized in your life, as all women have been socialized in our lives, to protect the men in our lives from feeling shame. All of us as women are taught, I think, to protect men from all kinds of feelings, but I think that we are socialized to protect men from shame. And so I wonder if perhaps you are taking on so much shame to spare him from the experience of feeling shame. I wonder if you are worried what might happen if he feels shame. I wonder if he's worried what might happen if he feels shame. And listen, I don't particularly want him to experience shame because shame actually takes us out of connection. I did a whole solo episode on how shame blocks repair. So his shame wouldn't be particularly functional for the two of you. It wouldn't really help you guys in your healing journey because it would take him away from you and it would be kind of him centering his own worthlessness or his own badness, and it would keep him from being an ally to you. But I certainly want him to be experiencing guilt. And I certainly want him to be experiencing accountability because those are emotions that motivate us to repair and to attune and to stay open-hearted and to stay near the person that we've hurt. So just a little bit of, inquiry there of, is your shame maybe protecting him from shame? I also wonder, in terms of the relational dynamic, if your shame is protecting him from your anger. There's two places that I see betrayed partners going, and sometimes moving between these two places. One place is shame and one place is anger. It's sort of like turning the distress inward or turning the distress outward. And I wonder if you might have some fear about what he might do or how he might feel if you are angry. And so is it not emotionally safe for you to be angry? So your anger kind of gets turned inward and becomes shame. Maybe it's that you see him trying so hard and, he's trying so hard. And so it doesn't feel particularly quote unquote nice to be angry at somebody who's trying so hard in their own work, in their own healing. So just thinking about your shame in the context of the relationship. Final thought is just kind of about you, Tina, like kind of long-standing wise. We know that shame is both a state and a trait. The state of shame is I feel shame in the wake of an experience. A trait is a little bit more like, your temperament or your personality. And there's research from about 20 years ago that found that some of us have a tendency toward those like self-conscious emotions like shame. In other words, some of us are primed to feel shame or we're prone to feel shame. And so if you are one of the people who is prone towards shame, I'm certainly one of the people who's prone towards shame, it becomes a perfect storm. You take your long-standing tendency to feel bad about anything and everything and put you in the situation of having been cheated on. And it's like a perfect storm. So of course, shame is really central and really present for you. And the last thing I'll say is I wonder about the impact of your family of origin dynamics. For those of us who had an inconsistent parent or an unavailable parent, a little kid in that situation makes it about themselves. They say, my parent is inconsistent, or my parent is unavailable, or my parent is volatile because of me. We take responsibility for our parents' bad, unpredictable behavior because it is preferable to believe in our badness than it is to believe in our parents' badness. If our parent is bad, we are deeply unsafe and we're pretty much doomed. However, if we are bad, at least we can keep trying to do right by our parent. And then hopefully, possibly, maybe we can get what we need. So if that dynamic was present for you when you were little, it makes sense that it's kicked up now. It makes sense that when something painful happens to you, you take it on yourself because you just know, that path. You've done it before, in your relationships. Also in that category of family of origin dynamics, we know for sure that early experiences of abuse, of neglect, those create longstanding feelings of shame inside of people. I am not loved because I'm not lovable. So people who have experienced early trauma in their families of origin, can very readily carry this proneness towards shame of believing I wasn't loved well because I am not lovable. And so I can imagine if there's any element of that for you, that early template gets activated right here, right now, today with the experience of the infidelity. Okay, Tina, I am thinking of you and so grateful that you reached out. Question 2 is from an anonymous listener in Wisconsin who uses she, her pronouns. She writes, I started noticing that my partner and I were having a daily routine. It seems like we were both getting tired of everything always being the same. I wanted some more free time, and so did he. Well, one night he went out with friends and he drank and he ended up calling a girl and she picked up and they had a 1-minute call. I caught him because as soon as he saw me, he was weird. I don't know what hurts more, that he initially tried to deny it or that the girl has the same name as me. So that night, I packed my things and left. The next day, he kept calling me and saying he missed me. I've gone back to him, but now I think I have a lot of jealousy. He's a tattoo artist, so I understand there will be all kinds of messages coming in from women, but I hate being this kind of person. Some part of me says to leave because of what's already happened. Okay, well, what I would say to you, listener in Wisconsin, is that your pain and your hurt make a lot of sense. It's really understandable that based on this experience, you have been left with some lingering feelings of jealousy and with some worry about what could happen. It's like, even though this was something that was very brief, it was a 1-minute phone call to a girl. It's like it gave you this really dreadful window into this world of what if, of what could happen. It I wonder if it perhaps punctured, a sense of total safety that you had in your relationship by showing you the possibility of what might be in the realm of the possible here. And I was thinking about this tattoo artist man of yours. The image I have in my head is that he's creative and he's gifted and he's charming and he's charismatic, and that those are the qualities that drew you to him, that you were attracted to his giftedness and his creativity and his charm and charisma. And now those qualities are the very same qualities that perhaps now feel like they're putting your relationship at risk, or qualities that feel threatening. And if that also fuels your jealousy of like, wait a minute, he's my tattoo artist. He doesn't belong to the world. And that there's something that's actually kind of unsolvable about that, right? If this is his gift and his purpose and his passion is to be in the world in this way, there's something that's unsolvable about how to have this creative partner who also feels really safe to you. And confusing too, because at the same time in your question, you write about how you guys have gotten stuck in a rut, so maybe that feels confusing too, of like, how can I be stuck in a rut with this creative tattoo artist of a partner? So I think part of what feels unsettling here is just that it's things that you thought were yours now feel a little bit not yours, and things that you thought were exciting have gotten a little bit plain and routine and ordinary. So it just feels like it's hard to kind of make sense of all of this. I, of course, want you to go inside yourself to better understand these feelings of jealousy that you're left with and what you want to do about them. So I'm thinking about your own history, what happened in your family of origin regarding infidelity. Did you have some firsthand experiences in your family? Did you watch a parent cheat on another parent? If so, it's really understandable that there's some fear of history repeating itself. It might be like you swore you'd never be a person who was in a relationship where there was infidelity. And so this whole situation might be extra, extra charged for you. Or it may be that there's something in your history that maybe isn't about infidelity, but that's about the threat of loss, the threat of losing something that you love, or feeling like you're being made a fool or being taken advantage of. So I wonder what the other experiences were in your life that you've had. So in terms of those connections to your own past, what I want you to be doing as you reckon with these feelings of jealousy is taking care of the younger versions of you and just being gentle with yourself about how this present experience stirs up stuff from your past. And I want you to think about, I've got 3 questions for you to sit with. First of all, who are you now that you weren't then? Like if you had an experience when you were younger of being made a fool of, or of losing something or somebody that meant a lot to you, maybe you weren't as well resourced then as you are now. So who are you now that you weren't then? Second question is, what resources do you have now that you didn't have then? And the third question is, what can you do today in your life today on behalf of that younger version of yourself? It's like if there was a younger version of yourself that got taken advantage of or that wasn't able to protect herself, how can you do that today in honor of that young version? Not like a revenge thing, but just as a way of honoring, something that you maybe experienced in the past by yourself, or something that overwhelmed you then. How can you bring the most empowered version of yourself to this experience? And from that place, then, I want you to turn towards your partner and do some work with your partner on this whole darn thing. So I want you guys to be talking together about the challenges of getting kind of stuck in a rut. It is incredibly common for couples, for long-term couples, for dual career couples, who are like working to make ends meet or to work high stress, demanding jobs, to get really stuck in routines and to only kind of have like the end of the day, little bits and scraps of energy and attention and time for each other. And that's the context in which this experience happened, isn't it? You guys were stuck in a rut. You wanted to change things up. And it's like you went from one extreme, boring redundancy, to the other extreme, drinking and making phone calls to girls. It's like too much of a pendulum swing from like boring stay at home to getting drunk with friends and calling a girl. So can the two of you talk together about what it might be like to break out of your routines together so that then you each get to experience novelty and connection and play, which are things that you desperately need, but you get to experience those things together. I want each of you to associate the other with fun, right? So that you can experience contexts that are fun, that are lively, that are exciting with each other. Because I think there's a risk here of like couple life is boring, time with friends is exciting. And I want there to be this middle path where it's like time with each other is exciting. I want you to be able to experience that with him, and I want him to be able to experience that with you. Here's the other part of the relational work as far as I see it. The biggest question for me is actually, what's going on for him in the wake of this experience? He got drunk, he called a girl. How's he making sense of that? Your jealous part is scared. Your jealous part wants to manage the situation, manage him, keep it from happening again. And I think there's a risk that you end up carrying all of this inside of you. So I actually want you to invite your jealous part to move to the sidelines and just let that jealous part observe and take a little rest and take some deep breaths while an empowered part of you steps forward. And that empowered part of you then invites him into a conversation. And that conversation is about, my dear, darling, tattoo artist of a partner, how can you and I protect all of what is awesome about this relationship from the risk of boundary violation? What are we going to do to protect all of what's good here from the risk of boundary violations, from the risk of breaches of trust? That's the conversation I want you to have with him. And I don't know, does he view this as a transgression? Does he view this as something that's outside of your relational agreements? If that part is difficult for him, because sometimes partners, minimize, it was just a phone call or it didn't mean anything or it only happened once, whatever. A helpful gut check is, how would you feel if I did the same thing? If I got drunk with my girlfriends and called a guy, how would that feel for you? Right. So can he sort of put the shoe on the other foot and walk around and in that? And what are your relational agreements? What are the boundaries that the two of you agree to that are designed to protect and preserve what the two of you are building? And what's the purpose of having relational agreements? How do we create boundaries and guidelines that protect the two of us? I guess I wonder, how does he want to live? What does his integrity feel like? How does he understand his impulsivity that night? To what degree is he curious about his feelings and what was maybe going on for him that primed him to make a choice that hopefully is out of character for him? I also am wondering, what does he want to do the next time he has that itch to call a girl? What does he want to do the next time he feels that impulsivity arising inside of him? What does that signal to him? What does he need to do inside of himself? What does he need to ask for from you? What does it mean? What's it about? I also am curious, what are his thoughts about how to rebuild trust? How can the two of you view your jealousy as a relational problem, not a reflection of your quote unquote neurosis or your craziness? Like, really, your jealousy reflects a relational problem. How can he be an ally to you in your jealousy? And I think ultimately the way he does that is by having an understanding of himself. How does he want to live? What helps him feel really good about looking himself in the mirror and feeling proud of showing up as the partner that he wants to be and that he feels good about being? All right, dear listener in Wisconsin, I hope that feels helpful to you. And I'm wishing both of you peace and ease as you figure out where you're going to go from here. Okay, let's move on to question number 3. Question number 3, reminder to you, listener, that this is the question that's coming in from an affair partner. So if you are actively in the throes of recovery from infidelity yourself, you might just want to pause here. There is no obligation to listen to the entire episode. So check in with yourself and see what capacity you have to hear from an affair partner. Here we go. Question 3 is from an anonymous listener in Boston who uses she, her pronouns. And she writes, I am the other woman. I've been in a 5-year affair. I am 9 years younger than him. We socialize with family and friends. We enjoy sleepovers, trips, birthdays, and holidays. He gave me a platinum American Express card. He has the keys to my apartment. I even traveled with him to a family funeral. There's trust, chemistry, and friendship. Leaving his marriage has never been discussed, and it is not expected. They have sex and they vacation with their 3 teenage and adult kids. Initially, I was deceived into believing this was a loveless marriage until their couple's trip to Paris, which he told me about. From her social media, I saw happy pictures of date nights and very romantic birthday dinners. In July, he lied about the yearly family vacation. He said it was a guy's trip. I just learned that she works 2 miles from my apartment and has been for the last 3 years. He works a block away from my apartment building where he parks his car overnight and sometimes gets tickets. Thoughts of the 3 of us in the neighborhood in some capacity have tarnished this. How is he not exhausted from the lies and obstacles? What kind of a monster am I shamefully still in love with? Is this a split self affair? How do I begin moving on? Okay, Boston listener. So you have outlined how long this affair has been, how deep this relationship is, how there are elements of caregiving and caretaking and support and interdependence. There's a lot here. So what I'm going to do is tackle your questions one by one. So you first ask, how is he not exhausted from the lies and the obstacles? And here, you're asking a question about cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance is actually built into the structure of the affair for both the betraying partner and for the affair partner. So both of you, each of you, has to have a way of making sense of or rationalizing what you're doing. There have to be processes whereby you can make this affair feel okay enough on your insides to keep doing it. So cognitive dissonance is, whenever we're living with the mental discomfort that results from holding 2 conflicting beliefs, 2 conflicting values, 2 conflicting attitudes. It's a friction. It's a rub. So the nature of an affair, it being a relationship that has all these elements of a relationship while also being shrouded in secrecy and kept in the shadows, that is in its very essence an experience of cognitive dissonance. And so what do we do when we experience that kind of like rub or friction is we make a story that helps it make sense, that lets it make sense. And be clear, we all have the experience of cognitive dissonance in some ways. When we say that we value our health, but we eat a bag of Cheetos, when we say we value fitness, but we, haven't moved our bodies in a stretch of time. There's lots of different ways that we have cognitive dissonance where we have to make things make sense inside of ourselves. And all of us would do well to pay attention to the stories that we tell ourselves that attempt to resolve that conflict, because there's the story that we use to bridge those 2 truths is a story that holds some information, about who we are and about ways that we're maybe out of our integrity. So that's what you're asking is, how is he not exhausted from the lies and the obstacles? Well, I guess I would say that probably he's got some ways of resolving it. He's got some ways of saying that he's entitled to this or that this isn't so bad. But I guess really what I want to know is, have you asked him that question? Have you asked him what keeps him from being exhausted? What keeps him in this relationship with you in this form? And I wonder, if you haven't asked him that question, what keeps you from asking him that question? Along those lines, you mentioned that the 2 of you have never had a conversation about him leaving his marriage and that you don't expect him to leave his marriage. I'm curious about the because here. So we haven't talked about him leaving his marriage because ... I have never expected him to leave his marriage because ... Like, I guess I just wonder, for your own process, for your own learning, how would you answer those questions? What's the reasoning? What do you think keeps you from expecting him to leave his marriage, asking him about it? And what does that tell you? What do those pockets of silence in your relationship tell you? And then, in terms of your question, how is he not exhausted from the lies and the obstacles? I guess I wonder if this is a question that you also have for yourself. To what degree are you exhausted by the lies and the obstacles, right? Because you aren't keeping this relationship from your spouse, but you are participating in something where you are enabling him to keep something from his spouse. So what about your exhaustion? As you check in with yourself about your own level of exhaustion, I guess I wonder, if you are exhausted, what keeps you from making a change? And if you aren't exhausted, what do you think keeps you from being exhausted? In other words, what is helping you sustain yourself in a 5-year affair? In what ways is this workable for you? You know, you ask also, what kind of a monster am I shamefully still in love with? Well, my dear listener in Boston, I am certainly not going to dehumanize him. I'm not going to dehumanize you for that matter. But what I hear in your question is a lot of emotion. And I actually hear emotion that is directed towards him, as you refer to him as a monster. And I hear a lot of emotion directed towards you as you talk about shamefully being still in love with him. Yeah. So I guess I wonder, where do those emotions go when you are with him? And what is the price that you are paying for suppressing these emotions? I suspect that when you're with him, those emotions are tucked away. You aren't talking about the future of the relationship. If you never have asked for things to be different than they are now, your emotions are going somewhere. And so I guess I wonder, what's the price that you pay for pushing down what sound to me like pretty strong emotions? Where do they go? What's the price you pay? I also, of course, wonder, where did you learn that? Where did you learn to take your questions and your feelings and your truth and push them so far down? Where did you learn that? I suspect that there's some history there. Somebody who can be an affair partner for as long as you've been an affair partner. I suspect that there's a way in which this has some ties to your history, some arena in which you learned that you could hang in there in a relationship where you can't be fully seen and heard and centered and celebrated. I, of course, want you to, in terms of that part of it, I want you to listen to the episode I did a while ago on the show called When You're the Affair Partner. So we'll link that in the show notes as well, because there's lots of depth there around some possible avenues of exploration of what might be true for you in your history that perhaps put you in a spot where you could be in this, in this role for as long as you've been. Okay. Your next question is this a split self affair? So, a split self affair is one of the 5 types of affairs that were outlined by Emily Brown in the late 1990s. And the split self affair is an affair that is like structured. It's like a long-term affair where the person in the affair has the benefit of the structure and consistency and reliability of a marriage, and also the emotional needs met within the affair. So the self is split. One part of me gets what I need from the structure of my marriage, and the other part of me gets what I need in my affair. So my emotional needs are met over here, and my kind of like day-to-day needs are met over here in my marriage. That's the split self. By the way, the other types of affairs that Emily Brown laid out were the conflict avoidance affairs, where somebody is actually cheating in order to help them stay within their marriage. It kind of takes pressure off of the marriage. Like, I will expect less of my marriage if I'm having this affair. The intimacy avoidance affair is an affair that kind of keeps the person from feeling too close to their spouse. It's like, I take my intimacy needs over here, and that keeps me from feeling smothered or hurt in my marriage. The third type of affair is a sexual addiction affair, which is an affair that happens in the context of somebody who's struggling with sexual addiction. The fourth type is the exit affair. This is the affair that happens kind of like on the way out the door. It's like the affair is the kind of like segue or transition out of a marriage. And then the split self affair. Those are the 5. Conflict avoidance affairs, intimacy avoidance affairs, sexual addiction affairs, exit affairs, and split self affairs. Listen, these labels are not an exact science. And like any label, the function of a label is just that it helps us understand something more deeply. So I guess for you, listener in Boston, what would change for you if you viewed this as a split self affair for him? What would be helpful for you? Like, would that be helpful for you to think of it as a split self affair for him? What would that mean? What would that symbolize for you? What might you do differently if you saw this as a split self affair? I don't know enough to say, but certainly an affair that lasts as long as this one is, I think is pretty safe to say. There are parts of him that live in one place and parts of him that live in another place. So that seems like certainly like a viable hypothesis. So if that is true, what does that mean for you? And again, I'm going to hold your little feet to the fire here and say that the question that is as important or more important is, what is the function that this affair serves for you in your life? So, okay, fine. It's a split self affair for him. What is it for you? What is the function for you in your life? In what ways does it work for you to have maybe just enough of him, not all of him? I don't know. I don't know what it is for you. But yes, you are not the one having the affair, but you are the one who is participating in the relationship as the affair partner. So why? What would you call it? What is the place it is in your life? Okay. Then the last question you asked is, how do I begin to move on? Well, certainly if you are not in therapy, I would love for you to be working one-on-one with a therapist to understand yourself, your history, sort of how you got here. Understanding how you got here is going to be helpful in terms of helping you figure out where you want to go from here. I think it's really important for you to accept that there is no pain-free way out of this. There is grief in the leaving and there is grief in the staying. Sometimes we get stuck in a status quo because we just see hard stuff on either path. And so I think that just accepting that and trusting yourself to be able to withstand the grief is really important here. I also wonder if you can leave, because you're saying you want to move on. Can you move on without making yourself or him or his wife the villain of the story? That's a really big one. Can you end this? Can you step away? Can you rebuild without throwing yourself under the bus or him under the bus or his wife under the bus? I think sometimes what keeps the affair partner from ending it is a worry about how big their shame would be. It's like, if I'm in it, I don't feel as much shame as I suspect I'm going to feel when I step away. So I think it's really important that you don't beat yourself up about this. I think you can take responsibility and accountability, but I think you also need to be practicing self-compassion and really getting yourself on a path to understanding your own integrity, getting really clear on what is it that you want and need and expect from intimate partnership. I've got 3 questions for you. First one is, what are the ways in which being an affair partner has worked for me? Second question is, what would I say to someone I love very much who found themselves in the spot that I am in right now? So imagine your very best friend or somebody that you love dearly is in a 5-year-long affair with a married man. What would you say to them? What would you want to be whispering in their ear? What would you wish for them? How would you talk to them? And then my third question is a question I've done a million variations of on the podcast over the years, which is this: what would I choose for myself if I had an unshakable belief in my worthiness? I also was thinking, as you asked the question, how do I begin to move on? I was thinking about that beautiful Anais Nin quote that goes, "And the day came when the risk to remain tight in a bud was more painful than the risk it took to blossom." And I guess I would say, listener in Boston, that that's what I wish for you. I wish for you to blossom. And I'm sure there are ways that you have felt blossomed within this relationship. I hear that there were some positive experiences along the way and a depth of connection. But I guess I wonder if it's time for you to reimagine what it looks like to blossom and what might blossoming for yourself, within yourself, in this life of yours look like. Okay, there we have it. Thank you so much to our 3 listeners who wrote in. I'm always grateful that you share your stories with me and that you put your trust in me to offer my thoughts. So if you have thoughts to add to the conversation or encouragement for these listeners, let's start a dialogue. So you can put a comment on YouTube or on Spotify and share your thoughts. I'm very, very curious how my responses today have landed for you. And while this is the final mailbag of the summer, I am going to continue to welcome and encourage your questions. And whether I riff off of them with a guest expert, or whether I use them as inspiration for a future solo episode, or maybe we do another batch of mailbags at some point, they are always, always, always appreciated. So keep them coming. And until next time, be well. Thank you for listening to our show. Our producers are Elizabeth Vogt and Mary Chan and Katie Pagich of Organized Sound Productions. Our theme music was composed by Slade Warnkin. The show is executive produced by me, Dr. Alexandra Solomon. Do you have a relationship question that you want answered on the show? Visit reimagininglove.com to send in a written or audio question. Questions can be about intimate partnerships, family relationships, friendships, you name it. If you're looking for more love and relationship content, you can find me on Instagram at dr.alexandra.solomon or visit my website, dralexandrasolomon.com, where you'll find my blog as well as the Intimate Relationships 101 e-course based off of the popular class I teach at Northwestern University. Thank you for listening and see you next week here on Reimagining Love.